Second World War, Italy.
And how old were you when you decided to enlist?
I was 17 years old when I was really thinking seriously about enlisting.
And how did your
And,
family react to that?
well, my family didn't know anything about it because I wasn't home. This was my secret, I guess. Eventually, I joined when I was 18, and then, of course, my family found out about it. But until then, they didn't know.
And why did you choose to go to war?
I thought it was the proper thing to do at that time. The war had been going very badly for the British. I'd noticed that for the first couple of years of the war, when I was quite a lot younger. And it seemed to me that that was the proper thing to do. And it was another thing, my stepfather had been in the First World War, and he was a Seaforth Highlander in the First World War, as a matter of fact. And I kind of wanted to emulate him, I guess. I was going to follow in his footsteps and end the wars, period. It didn't work, but we tried, both of us. He fought the war to end all wars, and I fought to finish the job, and we didn't quite get it done.
Still going on. So you were in the Italian campaign, and things started heating up in the Italian campaign for the Allies when they arrived in the Abruzzo region.
Yep.
Do you remember what kind of a situation you found there?
Cold and wet, miserable. That's what I found.
And do you remember your first clash with the enemy?
Yeah, it was a minor clash. It was over real quick, like. It was just 3 or 4 soldiers and a tank, and it didn't take very long. They were gone. They were, well, the tank got knocked out, and the soldiers fled. So that was my first experience for the battle.
And where was that?
I was just outside of Ortona.
Oh, it was, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the goal was the conquest of Ortona. Before the battle, did you expect strong resistance?
I was like everybody else, I guess. We thought it would kind of be a cakewalk. We were surprised that the Germans had decided to really defend Ortona, because up till then, no one had really fought in any concentrated city or town where there's a large population or a lot of civilians, rather. And so we were taken by surprise by these tactics.
The first place they really dug in was the battle for the Mural River and for the gully after the Mural River.
Yeah.
And you remember that vividly, do you?
No, I don't. I wasn't in on the Mural River battle, but the gully battle I was in on that, and that was very vivid, and it seemed to me very ridiculous, and we didn't have much of a hope, you know. And
that was World War I tactics, just
that
throwing
was, yeah.
troops over the front.
Yep. That was World War I tactics, and it was stupid, grim, and I think what the problem there is that Montgomery was kind of jumping on Vokes a little bit about getting something done, and Vokes was at his wit's end to get Montgomery off his back, I suppose. So for this, well, we paid for it in spades.
And do you remember your first day of battle in Ortona?
Yeah, that was some day. We went into the building. This very first building that we went into, we discovered our first booby trap, and I was lucky that our sergeant was the guy that discovered the booby trap, and he and a couple of other guys, I didn't have anything to do with it, but he and a couple of other guys set the booby trap off. We moved out of there, and he let it go.
You set it off without injury?
Yeah, he set it off without injury to anybody.
just ask you to describe what you found when you arrived in Ortona.
A lot of rubble. We were scattered around quite a bit, and there was an awful lot of rubble in the streets.
We were talking about that first day of battle in Ortona, and you were talking about how you'd come across the town and it was just knee deep in rubble, probably worse than knee deep.
Worse than, yeah. Then we got into the first building, and we got this booby trap thing, and we got that behind us, and then if you went out on the street, you got shot at right away. And several attempts at that, and so we waited for nightfall. And at nighttime, then we did a little infiltrating. And the next day was when somebody, I don't know who, but somebody had come up with the idea of blowing holes in the walls so that you could go from one room to the other. What I found, we actually, myself personally, I only used the mouse hole trick once. And I didn't do it. The other guy with us did it. But the thing was, he got killed.
So maybe you could tell us again about the whether or not you knew the enemy that you were facing.
We knew that we were facing the 1st German Paratroop Division and that they were fresh troops. Mind you, we didn't know the total history of them, but as it turned out, some of them had been in Leningrad.
Is that right?
So they were very seasoned soldiers. Of course, mind you, there were a lot of guys that were fairly new to the business.
But those guys probably didn't come back from Leningrad.
Yeah.
Did that make a difference in terms of your mindset? What kind of a division you were facing?
Yes, it did. But I don't think it was necessarily a big detriment to us, to our line of thinking. We were a little bit more determined, I guess, because these fellows they came with a very large reputation, and of course we were pretty conceited. Being Canadians, we were naturally conceited, I suppose.
So that just made you more determined,
yeah,
more intimidated.
I would agree with that. Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And the fighting in the streets of Ortona, that was a dirty job?
It was a very dirty job. The things that I found that bothered me more than anything was every now and again you would come across people that were kind of stranded.
Civilians?
Civilians. They were rather stranded, and you had to feel dreadful for them, the poor devils who were dirty and hungry and mortally afraid. Well, you couldn't blame them, you know.
And at the minimum, what was the distance between you and the enemy?
Probably a 10-inch wall.
Is that right?
Yeah.
10-inch wall, and that was it.
Yep. They were in the very next room. You could hear them. They could hear us.
Have you ever fought in a body-to-body, man-to-man clash?
Not really.
Did you see guys that did?
I never knew anybody that actually did personally.
The Sherman tanks of the Three Rivers Regiment, were they helpful for the infantry?
Yes,
They
well,
weren't too limited in the streets?
they were limited in the streets to some extent, and another thing that they did was sometimes they made life pretty darn miserable for you because they'd bring down a lot of fire all around you, and that was something that wasn't really desired. But for the most part, if we wouldn't have had them, it would have been much, much tougher for us.
And how many hours did you stay in the front line on a normal day in Ortona?
A normal day in Ortona was a 24-hour day. And
you didn't catch any sleep?
Very little. Well, that's one thing the soldier never gets is sleep. If you're anywhere near the front line, you don't sleep. And when you're right in, smack in, maybe you can grab an hour's nap, a cat nap now and again, but that's it. You're on the verge of exhaustion all the time.
You talked about facing the booby trap on the first day. Do you have any detailed knowledge on how they worked?
Not really, outside of the fact that this one obviously had a tripwire on it, and
Was that the only one that you came across?
that was the only one that I came across personally in Ortona, yeah.
So you didn't find your environment littered with booby traps?
No, not really. Nor did I find my environment littered with snipers. But then...
Now, a lot of soldiers talk about the fear that accompanies them through battle. Do you remember an episode when you thought that you might die?
Well, not in Ortona. Later on, in other battles, yes, but not in Ortona itself. I made the acquaintance of a fellow who was, to be perfectly frank with you, should not have been there. He was so afraid. He was traumatized, absolutely traumatized, and it made me feel terrible just to be around him. And the worst part of it all is that a couple of days later, I found this same fellow that was so traumatized, we found him dead. And I found that so miserable for myself, because this guy really shouldn't have been there. And so his life was thrown away. He incapable of defending himself or of being of any use to anyone. So he was an easy target, I guess.
And did you lose many friends in the streets of Ortona?
Yeah, I lost a few, yes.
Do you have any particularly painful memories with regards to experiences with friends and the difficulties they may have had?
The particular miserable memory that I have is about the fellow who was traumatized beyond belief and shouldn't have been there.
Now, what was your worst day in Ortona?
I suppose the worst day was the acquaintance of this fellow that was so traumatized. I found that a very difficult day, and I found that he kind of haunted me for a long time afterwards.
Nobody saw that they should have taken him out of the line?
This was the thing that puzzled me. You know, I talked to my sergeant about that, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders about it, but he thought perhaps maybe we should tell one of the officers, but didn't see any around handy right at that particular time. And then, of course, we were on to other things, and we left this poor fellow behind. Apparently what got him was a piece of shrapnel, and that's what the medics told us anyway afterwards. A little tiny piece of shrapnel.
He was a Seaforth.
Yes, he was a Seaforth, yes, ma'am.
A lot of soldiers were psychologically overwhelmed by battle. So were there others, or was everybody in a pretty sort of determined state of mind in your troop?
There probably were a lot of others, but not to my knowledge.
Do you remember which day and how the Cathedral of St. Thomas in Ortona was destroyed?
Well, I remember that cathedral quite well. As a matter of fact, the position I was in, I think about somewhere between 150 and 200 civilians were ensconced in the cathedral. For some reason or other, the Germans decided that they didn't want them there anymore. I suppose it was because they were going to blow the joint. That's the only reason I could see for it. But anyway, there was an open square between me, my position, and the cathedral. And these people were all chased across that square. For some a considerable length of time, I was really concerned about that because we had heard stories about the paratroopers crouching down and running in the crowd. Then once they would get behind your position and they would spring back up, they'd stand up and shoot you from behind. So I was very, very concerned about that, and I didn't want to be shooting these people, but hey, as it turned out, it was okay because there weren't no Germans amongst them, and that made me feel good.
So you didn't fire any shots. You
No,
didn't want to take the chance of shooting
but
the civilians.
no, I didn't. I was very, very edgy, but I didn't do any. I never fired anything over their heads, and they ran right on by my position and
Your
up the alley.
Were you inside of a house at that point?
I was
out
inside
the
of a
window?
house looking out. Yes.
And then the civilians left.
The civilians.
They ran out of the church, and
Yeah.
quite soon after then, did the cathedral come down?
It wasn't very long after that they blew the front end out of it, and I think that their intention was to blow a lot more of it down, but it was a stronger building than what they figured it was. At least that's to my knowledge. That's how that worked out.
And you felt that you might have contributed to some of that damage as well, not you personally, but the Allies.
Yeah, well, I think afterwards there was a lot of damage caused by some of our guys with our tanks and one thing and another. That happened that way. We did with our 6-pounders and with the tanks in order to get access to buildings and rooms, individual houses, to get started in them. You had to blow away something in order to get in there.
So the Germans got the first crack at it.
Yep.
They brought the front half of the building down.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then at that point it becomes an ideal defensive position.
Yep.
So you have no choice really but to continue to batter it down.
Yeah. What happened is that there's such a pile of rubble that went onto the streets that you couldn't get a tank over them, And of course, Bren gun carriers were pretty well useless in there anyway because they throw a track pretty quickly, and I don't think we used them much anyway.
How would they clear the rubble from the streets for the tanks to make progress? I would imagine if anybody got out there, they'd be shot at.
Yeah, they would. No, you couldn't do that. You couldn't piecemeal your way through there. Eventually, of course, somebody would find a way around, and they'd drive a tank around it.
The rubble stayed, and
you had to find your way around it. Yeah, eventually. Of course, they were pretty sharp about it all, because what they did is they would leave certain streets open for you, and but then they had those streets would be zeroed in. They would have 88s on them and machine guns and that sort of thing. And so there's an open street, very inviting, but it's full of nothing but danger. And of course, the streets that they couldn't defend in that manner, that were difficult for them, well, then they would blow them full of rubble, make it difficult for us to use that street. So, and of course, the streets were all over the place. They're convoluted every which way they're going. And another thing that we didn't know about, at least I personally didn't know about, was the subway below. There were tunnels below, for the trains and that sort of thing, and that's where a lot of civilians were holding up in there until after the battle was over.
Were the Germans occupying those tunnels, do you know?
I think probably they were to a certain degree, but then it would have been difficult for them to make a livelihood there, to have their food and all that sort of thing there. So I'd imagine that was not one of the primary purposes of them being there.
Was getting lost a problem in the town?
Yeah, you didn't want to stray too far afield, because you might not find your way back, or you'd find yourself dead. So you had to be a little careful about that sort of thing.
You talked about the snipers before, Maybe you could just tell me a little bit about Canadian snipers versus the German snipers.
Well, we didn't per se have any snipers. The Germans had their sniper. They were trained as snipers, and there was always two of them. Sometimes there were three of them together, and one is a spotter, and so on and so forth. We, to the best of my knowledge, we never had anybody trained like that. If you took up a position on your own or with a buddy, well, and you found sniping a way of getting things done, well, then you used that. You adapted yourself to whatever was handy. Whatever means there was there left open for you to use, that's what you did. I know I personally did it myself. I did a certain amount of sniping myself, but
was there such a thing as a period of rest or a reward for anyone who was more effective at the front of the line than others?
Gee, that's a hard question. I don't know. I never got any special treatment that I know of. The only thing special that I got was the break for Christmas dinner.
Now, this is something really special about the Battle of Ortona. Can you tell us your personal account of the Christmas dinner?
Yeah, well, I didn't even know this was going on, and history tells me now that this was kind of a spur of the moment sort of thing, and I think it was only sanctioned 3 days in advance, and people had to journey afoot, to gather up the meat and the vegetables and all that sort of thing. Anyway, Company Sergeant Major came down where we were, and he was hollering at everybody, just grab your rifles and head up to the cathedral where we're going to have Christmas dinner. I didn't believe it, I thought, the guy is goofing us, This is another one of those ridiculous army rumors, and as it turned out, it was true. And hey, we did enjoy an hour or so of relative peace. While we were having our dinner, there was still action going on. There were 6-pounders just outside of the church hammering away, and every now and again you could hear German machine guns letting go, and our Ren guns would be answering them back, and things like that. It was, the din of war was still going on.
And not everybody was allowed Christmas dinner.
Not everybody got to have Christmas dinner, no.
Most of the Seaforths did, is that right?
I believe most of them did. All the Seaforths that were inside of Ortona itself did, to the best of my knowledge. There were some guys in reserve that never got into, like for instance, Smokey Smith. He was in reserve outside of Ortona, so he didn't get in on the Christmas dinner.
But the guys in the heat of the action.
Yeah,
allowed that break.
yeah. All the guys that were in the heat of the action, they were allowed that break, and then after we had our Christmas dinner, we went right back to where we'd been, and some of us found ourselves having to fight our way back to our original positions, and thankfully the struggle wasn't too great.
And what was the atmosphere like inside the church?
One of disbelief, I think, mostly, and everybody was slightly edgy, I would think, to start with, and very little talking going on, I'll tell you. Everybody was really, really quiet. I remember that. I remember, I'm a very talkative fellow, and I didn't have anything to say. But after a little while, people started talking. And
You had an hour, is that right? You had 1 hour off?
about an hour, yes. More
And
or
they
less.
cycled different units through, did they?
Yep.
You were one of the first guys to go through.
Yeah, we were the first to go through, and we had some Three Rivers tanks with us when we had our dinner, and some people from Loyal Edmonton Regiment,
So it was a
We're
mixed
mixed
bag.
in. We're a mixed bag. Yep. Quite a few different forces in there. There were there were artillery people in there as well. You know, like the anti-tank people, that sort of thing.
Were, were they serving dinner in more than one room?
I believe so.
The
Yeah.
room you were in was photographed.
Yes.
The photograph
I
was
actually the room I was in was outside of the church, and where the Seaforth Highlanders, or the main body of the Seaforth Highlanders, had their Christmas dinner was inside.
I see. So the configuration outside of the church was that V pattern of tables that
Yep. Mm-hmm.
we see in the photograph.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
you remember that vividly.
Vividly. I remember being crunched in the corner. We were jammed pretty tight together, you know, and I remember being crunched right in the corner.
And did they close it in when you
Yeah,
got in?
after we got in, they closed it in and laid another plank out, and another 4 or 5 guys could sit down, and probably made space for 3 more guys on the inside, and 4 more on the outside.
And not everybody ate on china.
No, not by any means. All I had was my mess tins, and of course I utilized them. And but there were guys there that had china, and I looked at them rather strangely. I thought, where the heck were these? What are these guys doing anyway? But you know, I guess it's well, that's war.
Did you see the inside of the church and the way the tables were set up there? Or were you just
No,
ushered into
no,
the
we
courtyard and ushered
no,
back out?
we had come up a kind of a byway, an alleyway sort of thing to get there, and so this particular where we were was outside of the church, and you could hear the people inside of the church are doing a lot of. You could hear through the wall, you know, there's a lot of yucking going on there, and as a matter of fact, I'm certain, although I've been told since that. The bagpipers were playing more than one time, but to my knowledge it was only the once. And that Matthew Halton was broadcasting back home to Canada at the time that I was having my dinner, and that sort of thing.
And you remember your dad afterwards talking about that?
Yeah, he was. My mother said to me when I got home, she said, you know, Dad told me. He was listening to the broadcast and listening to the Seaforth piper playing our regimental march past, and he told Mother, he says, Ernie's having dinner. So, you know, I'm led to believe that this is true.
Did you hear the
At least I'd like to believe that.
I think it is. Did you hear the Padre speak? He spoke.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So he came round to each group and spoke?
Yeah, he spoke to us, yeah. I know that Colonel Thompson and the Brigadier Hoffmeister were on the other side of the wall. I know that, but they didn't talk to us.
I think one of them was playing the organ.
Yeah, there were one of the major was playing the organ. He was an organist.
And of course, on the other side of the wall.
On the other side of the wall. Yep. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. We only heard ever such a little bit of that because. Well, whilst we were there, the bagpipes were playing the Road to the Isles, and one bagpiper, not the whole bunch, just one.
Were you aware that a photograph was taken?
No, I had no idea. I was full of total disbelief. When, you know, my wife said to me, she said, Ernie, you're in that picture. And I said, nah, you're nuts. I'm not in that picture. And you know, that was when we had that Italian display here in the Italian gallery. For some reason or other, I took my digital camera and I took a picture of that Christmas dinner thing. I took it home and I put it on my computer, and I blew up everybody's face on my computer. And by golly, there I was. Absolutely. No denying me.
Well, and clearly you remember your position at the table that day.
Yeah, well, I remember being in that corner and being jammed in there, and there's absolutely no doubt that that's me holding my empty mess tin out there to have food put in it. You know, for the longest time, my keenest memory of that dinner was the bottle of ale and the chocolate bars and probably the fresh fruit. The rest of the stuff I didn't remember at all. And I guess it just didn't register with me. But the bottle of ale sure did. I'll tell you that. And I really even remember what kind it was. It was Tennant's ale, and there was a large bottle, a liter bottle, a clear glass. So, you know, just a light, pale-colored beer, much like Alexander O'Keefe's Pale India Ale.
That helped settle the nerves?
Yeah, it did. You know, I think after everybody had drank about half of the bottle, they relaxed considerably.
You said that everybody had to go right back to the front lines
Yep.
afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Did it help morale, that dinner?
I think probably it did, you know. Thinking about it afterwards, I guess maybe it did. I know it was a topic of conversation I guess it went on forever. We're still talking about
60 years.
it. Yeah, 60 years on, we're still talking about it. So it must have been a pretty fair thing to do.
Do you remember the name of the church?
No, it's quite a long name. Really, you know, I never properly did know the name of the church. There was something that I wasn't totally concerned with, you know.
No,
So,
you weren't taking note of your historical
no,
details.
it wasn't of any great historical significance to me, one way or the other.
So tell me, do you remember the day that the Germans fled?
No, I don't, because I was no longer there in Ortona. I had been wounded and convalesced out of there.
And how did you get wounded?
Sniper got me.
Sniper got you.
Yep.
In your leg?
Yep. In my leg and in my back, and of course I did a lot of bleeding and all that sort of stuff. So.
But you weren't afraid?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, you know, I got hit and I was surprised that I had gotten hit, and I was surprised at my physical reaction to it because it wasn't very long and I fainted.
Is that right?
Yeah, from a loss of blood.
So do you remember them taking you out of there?
No, I remember I must have been maybe an hour later. I don't know how long, but some time had passed, and I woke up, I'm on a stretcher, and there's 4 young Italian lads carrying me out.
So you were rescued by civilians?
Well, of course, our own guys were looking after me up to a degree, but the Canadian Army had hired civilians to augment the stretcher bearers and that sort of thing.
Was there other interaction with civilians?
Not really. Not to the, well, I gave them a package of cigarettes and that sort of thing, and they were, and I let them know that the cigarettes were theirs, period. They could have them, the whole pack, and that brought on a lot of smiles, and of course everybody stopped doing what they were doing. They put me down on the ground, and after everybody got all lit up and were puffing away, they had each probably a couple of good drags on their cigarette. Then they picked me up and away we went again. But they were all smiles about the whole thing, and of course I kept passing out all the time. So you know, my memory of that's pretty hazy. The only memories I have then are I eventually got to casualty clearing station, you know, the regimental aid post, and where there was doctors and that sort of thing.
And did they have to surgically remove bullets?
No, they didn't. All they did was suture me up and bind me up to try to, you know, stop the bleeding, and give me a blood transfusion. I remember that, and it froze me. My God, it was cold. And then the next thing I remember was I was in an ambulance headed for a hospital. And then, of course, after I got to the hospital, that was when they took the bullet out and all that sort of thing.
So the first order, of course, was to stop the bleeding.
Stop the
And
bleeding,
they
yeah.
left the deeper surgery to the
Yeah,
surgeons at the
yeah.
hospital.
They did all the probing was done in the hospital and the removal of bullets and
How long was the recovery?
recovery probably about a month, something in that order.
And then back in the line.
Then I headed back towards the lines and minor detour here and there. I think I went to Naples, and from Naples we went some other place in Barrie, and then we went back up to the regiment. But it was kind of bouncing around a little bit. I think what the regiment was giving me the opportunity to heal mentally as well as physically from my ordeal. Yeah.
Are you aware of the Canadian Army assisting civilians in any way during or after the Battle of Ortona, helping them to escape or digging them out of rubble, that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. That sort of thing went on. I know that we were very solicitous of the population. We, if you were in like when I was in places like Naples, we're well behind the fighting and that sort of thing. It was an everyday occurrence to try to find somebody to wash your clothes for you, and someone that would make you a home-cooked dinner, even if all it was just spaghetti and tomatoes. It was good enough. It was a home-cooked dinner. It was a great deal, and I don't know of any soldier of any stripe that didn't pay well for the services rendered. And I know that we shared we had lots and lots of food that we didn't particularly want, certainly didn't like, so we gave that away freely. So I would think that on the main, I think that we had a pretty decent relationship with the general population. Yeah.
Some historians say that the conquest of Ortona was too great a cost.
Yeah, for the amount of territory that we gained, the position we gained, the advantage we got out of it was nothing. So what was the point of it? The point of it, I suppose, was that we were seen to be doing something. And that seemed to be the only answer for Montgomery and other people, that we had to be seen to be doing something. And so...
Was it a point of pride, do you think?
Well, there was a
when
certain...
the Germans
yes,
dug in there?
the Germans were dug in there. There was a point of pride with them, and I think I know there was with us too. And we were about as determined to get them the hell out of there as they were determined to keep us from getting in.
Even on the command level, maybe in the fog of war, there wasn't an overall strategy considered.
Not
getting
really.
carried away with the momentum that was building at that moment.
Yeah, not really. You know what? As far as I know, we were just kind of like pilots used to say in the First World War, flying by the seat of their pants. We were taking it day by inch by inch, actually, not day by day, but room by room, and it just seemed like you had to readapt yourself to different situations. Different buildings brought up different tactics required. The width of a street makes a difference. The narrowness of an alley makes a difference. That sort of thing. So you were forever ad-libbing, actually, on the job.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a certain amount of ad-libbing going on at the command level as well.
Absolutely there was.
It's easy to look back in retrospect and say
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't a good decision.
Oh yes, I'm certain that this was mashed over in headquarters considerably. I would bet any number of dollars that people like Folks had second thoughts about the whole thing after it was over with. And well, I would imagine he had a few uneasy nights.
They did.
Yeah, I should think so.
Do you think it's true that Montgomery sacrificed Canadian soldiers for the battle?
Well, I thought that used needlessly. Perhaps he wasn't directly to blame for it, other than the fact that he was harassing our commanders to get something done. And I think our commanders were so preoccupied with trying to please him that they didn't really think things out properly. That's just my personal opinion.
After serving in the Second World War, how do you describe war to young people who've never been in battle?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer. It's a good question, I guess. You have to judge the age of your audience and the capabilities of their understanding, their ability to understand things. So you absolutely have to temper your presentation with the audience you have. Some people you can really tell them exactly what happened, and other people you can't, because it's just too much for them to absorb, or they're too young and it'll might give them wrong opinions. You just don't know.
And you've gone through a process yourself personally where when you first started talking to kids about it, you said you didn't want to talk about any of it much, and then you thought if you did, maybe they wouldn't believe you.
Yes, that's correct. I was concerned that some of the things I had to say would be unbelievable, and sometimes I wonder about it myself, and gee whiz, did I really do that, sort of thing. And but I've gotten over that sort of thing now. It's for the longest while I couldn't bring myself to talk about some of the nastier things of war. Some of my horrible memories and the recall was something that I had to kind of more or less keep to myself. It was too personal, too close, too much in me to be revealed, because when you start emptying your heart out, then you're opening yourself so that everybody can see into you. And that's not necessarily the best thing in the world for you. It's a hard thing to accept, is to allow people inside. And that's, of course, what you're doing when you let them in on the real heavy nitty-gritty of war.
Those of us that have taken the time to think about it find it absolutely remarkable that a whole generation of you guys dropped everything and went over there to fight a war that you hadn't started. And we like to think of you as heroes. But you said you're not so sure yourself you feel like a hero.
No, I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I kind of more or less promised myself that I was going to go, and I did what I did, and sometimes I wasn't very satisfied with certain things, certain outcomes. But it's done, and I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't change a minute of it. If I was young and I needed to go again, I wouldn't, in a heartbeat, I'd go.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you.